Hey folks, let's talk about communicating. This topic is about communication planning. Should probably call this Create a Winning Workplace. First, I'd like to start with a brief intro to the topic. According to Rita Mulcahy's PM Crash Course, she did a poll some years back. She asked, what is the number one employee complaint about their management or project? Any ideas what that is? You guessed it, poor communication. She goes on to say that the secret to effective communications is to plan for it. Let's look at what PMI's fabulous PMBOK guide has identified for communications. In fact, they've put together a knowledge area called the Project Communications Management Knowledge Area. And I like using KA to stand for knowledge area. After identification and the analysis of stakeholders, it's the planned communications process that we're going to mostly discuss here. So what's produced? I know, a communications plan. So if you put very little time into the planning of communications, you'll get what you deserve. Communication is multidimensional. Identification of your audience, your stakeholders, is vitally important. The majority of your time should be focused on effective communication, and you need to spend upwards of about 90% of your time effectively communicating. One way to look at it is where the audience fits organizationally. We'll put you down here at the bottom, and you have internal communications within the project team. You have external, outside the project to customers, media, other project teams, and so on. You also have management, executives, where up and down the organizational structure it's expected that you're communicating project information, and horizontally with peers. And this could be organizations that depend on you, that you depend on, whatever. Another way, and probably a more meaningful way, is based on a concept called the power interest grid. And this is shown in this diagram, where you have stakeholders that, in this case, this lady has a very high degree of power to help with the project, but not that high level of interest in the details. Whereas you have someone else, for example, this gentleman over here, where he has little power to influence the outcome of the project, but he has a high degree of project interest. Does one size really fit all in terms of communications? You probably don't want to complicate your life as a project manager or scrum master, but not everybody is willing to know the same amount of information about your project. It could be a huge mistake to assume that one level of communication fits all. And here you are. There are some variety of different ways you may want to communicate in terms of the amount of information or the quality of the information. One is by email to this group of stakeholders. Another is email plus attachments that may be documents or spreadsheets or more detailed information. Another might be a simple slideshow, and this would be typical of project reviews to the executive staff. The basis of communication assumes the following components: a sender and a receiver. And the sender is shown on the left and the receiver on the right. A message you wish to communicate is encoded, or in other words, put in some sort of presentation format, sent over some form of medium, such as email, voice, whatever, to the receiver. At that point, the receiver may then decode it, in other words, comprehend what was said, will in turn encode and recommunicate the information, which then gets decoded by the sender. There are two major issues. Just because you communicated as a sender doesn't mean the receiver really understood. Assuming that you sent one-way communication, unless you engage in some form with two-way communication and validate that the message was understood, and that may include body language, a response, an interpretation, are you really sure the receiver understood? All this is commonly called noise. There are several types of communication methods. The first would be interactive. This is probably the best way to communicate, as there's dialogue going from the sender to the receivers, it's coming back. There's all sorts of dialogue interchange. It's usually in the form of meetings, phone calls, and video conferencing. Pushing communications out to receivers who have a need to know is most typical. But like we've already discussed, you really aren't always sure whether everyone comprehends the message. This puts more pressure on you, the sender, that the information is clear, stripped out of subjectivity and jargon, and doesn't hide bad news with phrases like, I'm going to write it down, we're making progress. There's a special place in hell for folks that say that that means absolutely nothing. Lastly, there's pool communication. Where there's so much stuff to communicate, your best bet is to post the information up on some server where others that are most interested in it can retrieve it. This is definitely a one-way form of communication, and there is typically no way to know if the information has been accessed or let alone comprehended. Of course, all these can be presented in a variety of ways that we've discussed, and I'll present best to worst. Formally, which is reports, memos, briefings, statement of works, and presentations. Informally, emails, hallway chit-chat, meetings. And then there's the unofficial form of communication, which is off the record, which we usually don't ever want to do. How about skills we need to develop as communication experts? I'm going to bring up this little yellow pad. Here's the top skills you're going to need to be an effective communicator. Be prepared with the right information. Know the facts. Listening, not talking. Listening, questioning and probing. This is the whole why. You should eventually get to the right answers and the right level of information. Insisting on an environment to remove, and I'll put that negative sign in front of it, obstacles. Properly setting and communicating expectations. It goes with other skills already mentioned, but it basically is being very careful to keep emotions and jumping the gun to a minimum. You folks that are people pleasers, you probably struggle through this. Persuading, that's the E. And negotiating, using effective communication to assist with getting the project team always moving forward. A real effective communication needs to be extraordinary at resolving conflicts and, of course, fistfights. Timely communication means everything. Spreading the bad news a week after it should have been communicated is definitely a no-no. According to Ed Yordan's superb Death March, he states that the ideal communication culture is where the manager is transparent with information and very timely. This is also very important for agile projects. And what benefit does timely communication give you? Well, I'm glad you asked. You're communicating to the team and communicating to stakeholders. The overall benefit of timely, effective communications, and that's why it's so important, is to gain trust and loyalty with the team and stakeholders. So now you know.